Good morning, salam alaikum. My name is Joy Preston and I'll be your host right here on Baina News Store on Baina TV. Our headlines. The cost of poor governance can be enormous, President Akufo-Addo has said. He said that everyone should be concerned about governance. Infractions as when they arise, they exact enormous cost that affect the entire society. In a quote, the president said, the cost of poor governance can be enormous. He stressed in remarks presented on his behalf by Minister of State at the Finance Ministry, Mr. Charles Edu-Boahen, to the Institute of Directors, Ghana LODGH, at its stakeholders forum. According to President Akufo-Addo, no sooner had the government assumed office in 2017 than it realized it had inherited, in a quote, a deficient financial infrastructure and ended up spending over 21 billion cedis to remedy the consequences of bad corporate governance in the financial sector. So the president is saying that the cost of poor governance can be enormous and that everybody should be concerned about it. He's really pointing at the fact that his government had to pay over or spend over 21 billion cedis to remedy the consequences of bad corporate governance he met when he came into office, and a further $4.5 billion to protect investors in failed assets management companies. Okay. The question really here is, how are governments managing their finances so that when a government is leaving power or is leaving its term of office, it ensures that what it's leaving won't cost the state further financial expenditure? That should be the question. Could his government be doing better? It doesn't mean that there will be less borrowing and better expenditures. I think that's the bigger question. However, he said that it's something we all ought to be concerned about because it certainly affects everybody. Okay. Other news, secure Gulf of Guinea from security threats. The Chief of Staff charges countries. The Chief of Staff, Mrs. Freema Akosua-Osei-Operi, has charged maritime sector players in the West and Central Africa to protect the Gulf of Guinea from the security threats that are hampering international trade through the domain. She said the sub-region's geographical location made it a beneficiary of all resources, including oil, that cooperation among member states was important to improve upon safety and security at sea. At the opening of the 16th extraordinary session of the Maritime Organization for West Africa and Central Africa in Accra recently, Mrs. Osei-Operi said although 90% of Africa's international trade, including import and export, was conducted by sea, insecurity was impacting growth in many coastal states and required a unified front to address the situation. I think this is true, particularly looking at the fact that most African countries, in terms of trade, most African countries do a lot of trade by sea, and there is so much threat along the Gulf of Guinea. The Maritime Organization for West Africa is calling upon all countries to come together to try and ensure that there are less threats when it comes to doing business on sea, goods being imported and exported across West Africa. At the end of the day, it's going to benefit all the countries within the West African region if all countries takes these threats seriously, as Mrs. Operi has said. Imagine 90% of Africa's international trade is done by sea, and within all of this, there's a lot of threat in doing business by sea. So countries really ought to take this call extremely seriously. Okay, let's look at all the news. Mr. Jinapor expresses worry over land degradation in Ahafo. He's the Minister of Lands and Natural Resources. Mr. Abu Jinapor, he said he's concerned about the extent of land degradation in the Ahafo region as a result of illegal mining, also called galamsey, and he has called on chiefs to assist in the implementation of measures to stop the situation. In a quote, he said, "I am amazed by the extent of land degradation as a result of activities of illegal miners in this area," he stated during a meeting with members of the Ahafo Regional House of Chiefs in Goswa at the regional capital recently. He added that, "When I observed the situation from the air today, I was convinced that we need to do more to fight this scourge in order to save our lands for prosperity," he said. So he has obviously had an eagle look at the land situation around this region and realized that there is a lot of damage to the natural land reserves, and has called that there has to be more action in stopping illegal mining, also known as galamsey. I think this is a menace that we have been dealing with for a very, very long time, except we all come together, corporate governance, policymakers, etc., all come together to realize that there's a lot that's probably going on announced with regards to illegal mining, and it's causing a lot of damage, damages to the natural reserves. Before we know it, maybe all the lands will be destroyed. So Mr. Jinapor said he's personally concerned that all of these activities are happening and that a lot more needs to be done. Let's hope that his call will be heard or echoed more, so that more stakeholders will come on board to try and actually put measures in place to fight illegal mining. All right. The General Secretary of the Ghana National Association of Teachers, GNAT, Mr. Thomas Tanko Moses, says the leadership of the association will deal with teachers on the GNAT across the country who fail to respect the code of conduct governing the association. This came after a terrible situation happened in which pupils lost their lives after they had gone for an errand for their headmaster. Addressing students, teachers and families of the 9 students of the St. Charles Lungwa Junior High School who died in a boat accident last Friday, whilst returning from their head teacher's farm, Mr. Musa expressed regret at the tragedy and urged the families to exercise restraint over the issue while processes progress to address the matter comprehensively. Okay, in other news, also on the terrible loss of lives by the students who went on an errand for their teacher. Now, there's a call by the Education Ministry saying that teachers should stop using pupils for labor. The Education Ministry directs the Ghana Education Service. Now, the Ministry of Education has directed the Ghana Education Service to put in place the right measures to ensure that the practice of teachers engaging pupils in any form of child labor becomes a thing of the past. The Deputy Minister of Education, Reverend John Ntim Fojo, who gave the directive, said he was not happy that teachers who had been asked to teach pupils rather engage the pupils in activities contrary to their mandate. I think this is something that has always happened, particularly in primary schools, where sometimes there aren't really regulators that are looking at what some teachers are engaged in doing. You find out even at some point that there are students who go on errands even during class hours because their teachers have asked them to do so. But let's hope that this call by the Ministry of Education and GNAT, that teachers should really stop engaging students in other activities apart from teaching them, would do so, because at the moment 9 pupils lost their lives just because they went on an errand for a head teacher. This is not something we should entertain anymore. It's not something that is also new. And let's hope that this call will go across all the schools across the nation, including the rural schools, where this practice is even seen as a norm. But it's not normal. If students come to school, they should be engaged to literally learn and not run errands for their teachers. Okay, other news. Decongesting prisons, alternative bills go to Parliament. Now, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Mr. Godfrey Dame, will soon lay before Parliament 2 bills that will provide alternative sentencing other than imprisonment for accused prisons and convicts. The 2 bills are the Plea Bargaining Bill and the Alternative Sentencing Bill. Okay, so 2 bills will be coming before Parliament as alternative to imprisonment. And these 2 bills are the Plea Bargaining Bill and the Alternative Sentencing Bill. What this means is the plea bargaining is where an accused person makes some concessions, either by wholly or partly admitting his or her guilt or assisting in the investigation and prosecution of others in exchange for the dropping of charges against the accused or receiving reduced sentencing. And the Alternative Sentencing Bill allows a court to sentence a convict to do community service and other options other than imprisonment. So these 2 bills, I guess if Parliament passes them, will probably reduce the congestion in the prisons. And also, I think people who don't really deserve, who shouldn't really be getting things like 20 years sentence for minor crimes, will have alternative ways of serving instead of, going into prison for something as small as, I don't know, maybe just minor crimes that shouldn't be 20 years. I mean, we have situations whereby the prisons are congested. There are people that are in there for crimes that what they should really be doing should be community service. So these 2 bills will be alternatives for imprisonment. Let's see how that will go. I am sure it will be subject to further discussion before it's actually passed in Parliament. Right, moving on to other news. Relevant records, evidence validating judicious use of COVID donations available. The management of the Akomfanochi Teaching Hospital CAT has assured that it has nothing to hide on the issue of how donations to the hospital in support of the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic were utilized. The hospital, in a statement, responded to media publications on a petition to the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, SHRAJ, alleging misapplication of COVID-19 cash donations, said it has accounted for how the funds were utilized. Okay, so CAT has come out to ensure that all the monies that were being donated to the Akofanochi Teaching Hospital with regards to COVID-19 fight is being utilized the way it should. And they are saying that it has therefore assured all stakeholders, especially its cherished collaborators and partners who made those important donations, that it has all the relevant records and evidence to validate its claims on the judicious use of the donations, and is in a position and very well prepared to make these available at the appropriate time and forum as part of the processes for seeking redress for the unjustified attack on its integrity. So CAT said that it has all the necessary information to prove that all the donations by the different collaborators and partners who have donated to the hospital to fight COVID-19 is available. They are saying that their integrity is intact and that they will not more or less tolerate any form of suggestions that says monies that have been donated are not being used correctly. Okay. Now, during the week, we had the news of the former Transport Minister, Mrs. Jifa Ativo, who passed away. She was the former Minister of Transport under the Mahama administration. And according to her family sources, Madam Ativo passed on in Accra in the early hours of Tuesday this week. She served as a transport minister from February 2013 to December 2015, when she resigned in the head of the controversial Metro Mass Buses rebranding contract saga. She was 65 years old. May her soul rest in perfect peace. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the 2022 budget. I'm gonna be just giving you some highlights about it, starting with road tolls scrapped from the day of the budget presentation. All right, let's go straight into it. The Finance Minister, Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta, has presented the government's 2022 budget in a budget statement and economic policy to Parliament. The delivery of the budget was on Wednesday and was in accordance with Article 179 of the 1992 Constitution. In the presentation, he indicated that capital expenditure, funding of key government flagship programs, wage bill, and interest payments have been identified as key drivers of expenditure growth. The minister also announced new taxes and some other interventions to meet the domestic revenue target. Now, some of the key highlights of their budgets was, let's look at the government services to see at least 15% upward adjustment in 2022. Okay, let's look at other key facts about the budget. Abolition of tolls on all public roads in the country. To address these challenges, the government has abolished all tolls on public roads and bridges. This takes effect immediately after the budget is approved, the minister announced. According to the finance minister, his argument was it is important to abolish all of these road tolls because, one, he argues that it causes environmental pollution, meaning that all these cars that are having to stop at the road tolls, as they pile up, there's more pollutions that they are all releasing into the environment, and it's not exactly healthy for the vicinities. And two, he argues that it causes long traffic. So it means that, let's say, if you're supposed to travel, let's say a journey that, let's say, take 20 minutes, it may take maybe even double. He argues that these are two fundamental reasons why the toll fees are all going to newly introduced initiative dubbed You Start, with a seed capital of 1 billion cedis. Now, the You Start initiative, which proposes to use 1 billion cedis each year to catalyze an ecosystem to create 1 million jobs, and in partnership with the finance institution and development partners, raise another 2 billion cedis, the finance minister has said. So he's saying that there will be a new initiative called You Start, and that would be the purpose of the You Start initiative is to create 1 million jobs. Okay, that sounds good. Another one includes revenue and expenditure targets. The government has also targeted an overall GDP, or gross domestic product, growth target for the year 2022 at 5.8%. So Ghana is projected to grow by 5.8% in the year 2022. The government targets to spend an estimated 137.5 billion cedis, while the 100.5 billion cedis is to be raised as total revenue for 2022. So it will spend. So the government is estimated to spend 137.5 billion cedis and will raise 100.5 billion cedis. Still, its expenditure is more than what it's going to make. But I am sure that over the course of the month, all of this will be broken down for us to understand at the grassroots level. Okay, that's a bit about budget 2022. I think a lot of people have their comments and are very, very much interested in knowing about how that is going to affect them. Now, let's look at some African news trending across Africa. Okay, let's look at this. We're told that 70% of Africans make a living through agriculture, and technology could transform their world. Rural areas are chronically underserved by financial service providers, which is a limiting factor for economic development. Even where financial services are accessible, evidence shows that social concerns are often not fully incorporated in funding decisions and the delivery of services. Okay, so 70% of Africans are making a living through agriculture, and technology could transform their lives. So this to me simply means that there is a call for more digitalization in the agri sector for Africa as a whole, since 70% of the whole of Africa makes a living through agriculture. Let's look at what's going on at Khartoum. Security forces, okay, all right, let's look at other news. Buying and selling half-shredded banknote has become the latest hustle in Zimbabwe. Zimbabweans are suspicious of banks and prefer to keep their money under pillows and beds. Okay, in previous crises, hyperinflation wiped out millions of savings, particularly in 2008. Now there is a lack of favored banknotes as they wear out faster than replacements come into circulation. Shortages have led to the government telling banks and retailers not to reject old or worn US dollars, but many defy the order. Okay, a lack of export means fewer new notes in circulation, and Zimbabweans are reusing increasingly grubby notes. All right, so Zimbabweans have started using old and worn out notes as they think that will make a good living for them. Okay, that's an interesting one there. Okay, let's look at other news in Africa. The economic effects of terrorism in Africa. In a number of African countries, terrorism has spurred research on the extent to which terrorism affects economic growth. But an area that has been less examined is the influence of military expenditure on the relationship between terrorism and economic growth in Africa. In Nigeria, for instance, groups such as Boko Haram and the Islamic State of West Africa province have been waging war in the northeastern zone of the country. This has led to the destruction of economic infrastructure, a reduction in domestic investment, and a fall in economic activity. For sure, we cannot exactly quantify the impact of terrorism in Africa, even as we speak. Places like Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the Tigray war that continues to exist, it certainly holds a lot of growth. Life isn't moving. People seem to be going round and round in circles. What we really have to be asking ourselves in Africa is where and when will this end? People